It started like any other day, but by sunset, everything had changed. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost, America was at war, and a nation was forced to rewrite the rules of daily life in real time. The September 11th attacks unleashed a global chain reaction, one we're still feeling over 2 decades later. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we explore the lasting impact of the deadliest foreign attack on American soil. Back in the 90s, air travel in the US was casual, even carefree. You could show up 30 minutes before takeoff and you still might make your flight. Families walked loved ones to the gate. There was no need for ID checks and boarding passes weren't required. You could carry full-sized liquids in your bag. You could even take a pocket knife onto the plane. Security meant a single metal detector manned by guards, hired by the airlines themselves. It was normal life in America, just 24 years ago. But September 11, 2001 obliterated the idea that airports could be welcoming spaces. Within months, Congress passed the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, federalizing airport security with military precision. Private security guards making $6 an hour were replaced by federal agents with arrest powers and an $8 billion annual budget. The transformation was swift and total. Suddenly, arriving 2 hours early became almost mandatory. Shoe removal became routine after Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, tried to ignite explosives in his sneakers on a Paris to Miami flight in December 2001. One failed attack changed the daily routine of billions of travelers forever. That pocket knife, now classified as a deadly weapon. That full-size shampoo bottle, a potential liquid bomb, limited to 3.4 fluid ounces since 2006. Today's teenagers can barely imagine the pre-9/11 world where non-passengers freely wandered the terminals, where "see you at the gate" wasn't just a movie cliché. Modern airports feel more like military checkpoints than transportation hubs, complete with X-ray machines that see through your clothes, drug-sniffing canines, and chemical sensors that detect trace explosives. The human cost extends beyond inconvenience. Family farewells now happen in parking garages instead of gate lounges. Business travelers factor security delays into every trip. The TSA confiscates tens of thousands of firearms, knives, liquids, and other items each year. But perhaps the deepest change is psychological. Airports once symbolized adventure and reunion, places where dreams took flight and families reconnected. Post 9/11, they became fortresses where everyone is a potential threat until proven otherwise. The casual trust that once defined American travel died in the rubble of the Twin Towers, and it was replaced by a security apparatus that treats every passenger as a suspect. In the end, it took just 6 weeks for a panicked Congress to fundamentally rewrite the rules between government and citizens. On October 26, 2001, President Bush signed the USA Patriot Act, a 342-page document that most lawmakers admitted they hadn't even read. Congress granted federal agencies unprecedented surveillance powers, reshaping the balance between national security and personal privacy almost overnight. The name itself was propaganda genius, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. Who could vote against patriotism? Only one senator did. Before 9/11, getting a wiretap required convincing a judge that you had probable cause that someone had committed a crime. The Patriot Act shredded that standard. Now agents could monitor anyone they deemed relevant to a terrorism investigation, a term so vague it could include your pizza delivery driver if he happened to visit the same mosque as a suspect. Section 215 became the government's Swiss Army knife for spying. Originally designed to let FBI agents grab business records in terrorism cases, the NSA twisted its language to justify collecting phone records of millions of ordinary Americans. Every call you made, every text you sent was stored in government databases, just in case. The Holy Land Foundation case revealed the new reality. In 2001, federal agents froze the assets of what had been America's largest Muslim charity, alleging it funded terrorist organizations. 5 foundation leaders were eventually convicted in 2008, but the broader impact was immediate. Muslim Americans stopped donating to Islamic charities altogether, afraid that their contributions would be labeled terrorist financing. Entire communities watched their charitable networks collapse under suspicion. The psychological impact was the point. When people know they might be watched, they change their behavior. They stop reading certain books, avoid certain websites, and think twice before donating to causes or attending protests. This method doesn't require actual surveillance, just the knowledge that it's possible. But the Patriot Act was just the beginning. If Congress could rewrite surveillance laws in 6 weeks, what could they do with an entire year? The result was a sweeping reorganization of the federal government. Imagine combining the Coast Guard, Secret Service, Immigration Service, FEMA, and 18 other federal agencies into one massive bureaucracy, and doing it in less than a year. That's exactly what happened in 2002 when America created the Department of Homeland Security, the most significant government reorganization since the Cold War. President Bush signed the Homeland Security Act into law on November 25, 2002. It created what would become the third largest federal agency with a budget of $40.7 billion for fiscal year 2005 and an estimated 180,000 employees. The department combined 22 different federal departments and agencies that had previously operated independently, often refusing to share crucial intelligence. The bureaucratic earthquake was immediate and visible. Suddenly, every federal building displayed the Homeland Security Advisory System's color-coded threat levels. From lowest to highest, the levels were low, green, guarded, blue, elevated, yellow, high, orange, and severe, red. Inspired by the forest fire color system, the scale was intended to reflect the probability of a terrorist attack and its potential gravity. But those colors, like everything else, transformed American psychology. Since March 2002, the national threat level remained at yellow or elevated, except for 5 periods when it jumped to orange, which meant high. Each color change sent ripples through daily life. Orange alerts meant longer airport lines, increased police presence, and a general sense that danger lurked around every corner. The system conditioned Americans to accept a permanent state of vigilance. Never again would the country return to the pre-9/11 mindset where terrorism seemed like someone else's problem. The colors served as a daily reminder that the world had fundamentally changed. Beyond the visual warnings, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, revolutionized how government agencies shared information. The department would fuse and analyze intelligence from multiple sources, including the CIA, NSA, and the FBI. The communication failures that had allowed 9/11 to succeed, different agencies hoarding crucial intelligence, would theoretically become impossible. The immigration system underwent equally dramatic changes. The Immigration and Naturalization Service became Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. This new agency had vastly expanded powers and a mandate to see every foreign visitor as a potential threat. Since 2002, DHS has awarded more than $55 billion in preparedness grants to communities across the country, fundamentally changing how local police, firefighters, and emergency responders operate. Small-town fire departments suddenly had military-grade equipment and federal terrorism training. Restructuring the government at home was only half the equation. The other half would reshape entire regions of the world and keep America at war for the next 2 decades. 3 weeks after 9/11, American bombs began falling on Afghanistan. For today's young adults, this timeline remains staggering. It may not have felt like it, but the America they grew up in had been at war for their entire lives. If you were born in 2006, you never technically knew peacetime until the last plane left Afghanistan in 2021. With the way things are in the world today, peace is relative, and it all stems from the aftershocks of 9/11. The justification for war back in October 2001 seemed crystal clear. The Taliban government harbored Osama bin Laden and refused President Bush's ultimatum to hand him over. When Taliban leader Mullah Omar declined, saying, "We cannot do that. If we did, it means we are not Muslims," the die was cast. Operation Enduring Freedom began on October 7, 2001, with cruise missiles striking Taliban and al-Qaeda camps. The initial success was breathtaking. Within 2 months, the Taliban government collapsed. Bin Laden fled to Pakistan, and Afghanistan appeared liberated. American forces numbered just 2,500, a light footprint for such a dramatic victory. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. What followed was 20 years of mission creep that transformed a focused counterterrorism operation into the longest war in American history. The goal expanded from capture bin Laden to defeat the Taliban to build a stable democracy. Each expansion required more troops, more money, more time. By 2010, American forces peaked at over 100,000 soldiers. The human cost mounted relentlessly. Over 2,400 American service members died in Afghanistan, with 20,700 wounded. But those numbers pale behind Afghanistan's devastation after 4 decades of conflict. Today, 23.7 million people, over half of the population, need urgent humanitarian assistance, with more than half being children. The 2021 withdrawal didn't end Afghanistan's suffering, it accelerated it. Nearly 700,000 people fled their homes after the Taliban's return, adding to the 6.3 million already internally displaced. The education crisis is particularly stark. Almost 1.4 million girls have been banned from secondary school since the Taliban took over. erasing decades of progress in women's rights. Afghanistan children bore a heavy burden. Of the 12.6 million children requiring humanitarian aid, 9.2 million need protection services. Nearly 900,000 children under 5 require urgent treatment for severe malnutrition, while over 24% of children aged 5 to 17 suffer from anxiety, 10 times the global average. Only 16% of Afghanistan's population can meet their basic needs. The Watson Institute estimates that over 176,000 people died in the Afghanistan conflict, including around 46,300 civilians. Millions more became refugees fleeing to Pakistan or Iran, or internally displaced within Afghanistan's borders. The economic cost was also staggering, $8 trillion according to Brown University's Costs of War project. To put that in perspective, America could have eliminated student debt nationwide, rebuilt the entire electrical grid, and still had money left over. Perhaps more tragically, Afghan interpreters and their families, people who risked their lives helping American forces, faced abandonment during the chaotic 2021 withdrawal. Thousands who applied for special immigrant visas remained trapped, facing Taliban retribution for their collaboration with the Americans. The war that began with overwhelming public support ended with the Taliban back in power and Americans questioning whether 20 years of sacrifice achieved anything lasting. Afghanistan became America's longest war, not because it was the most important, but because leaders could never define what victory looked like. But Afghanistan wasn't enough. Within months of toppling the Taliban, the Bush administration was already planning a second war, one that would prove far more controversial and consequential. The connection to 9/11 was always tenuous. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with the attacks, but in the post-9/11 atmosphere of fear and rage, that hardly mattered. The administration crafted a narrative that transformed Hussein from a contained dictator into an existential threat to American security. The smoking gun was supposed to be weapons of mass destruction. Secretary of State Colin Powell's February 2003 presentation to the UN Security Council featured satellite photos, intercepted communications, and confident assertions about Iraqi chemical and biological weapons programs. It was claimed that America had concrete facts based on solid evidence. Except the intelligence was fundamentally flawed. It was based on discredited sources like Curveball, an Iraqi defector whose claims about mobile biological weapons labs were fabricated. The aluminum tubes weren't for uranium enrichment, the chemical weapons facilities were abandoned, the mushroom cloud that Condoleezza Rice warned might be the smoking gun existed only in imagination. On March 20, 2003, American forces invaded Iraq anyway. Unlike Afghanistan's initial success, Iraq immediately descended into chaos. The Iraqi army dissolved, government institutions collapsed, and sectarian violence exploded. What was supposed to be a quick victory became an 8-year occupation that cost 4,500 American lives and over 200,000 Iraqi civilian deaths. The regional consequences were catastrophic. Iraq's sectarian civil war empowered Iran, America's main rival in the region. The power vacuum created by toppling Hussein eventually gave birth to ISIS, which at its peak controlled territory larger than Britain and inspired terrorist attacks worldwide. Iraq also normalized practices that would have been unthinkable before 9/11. Drone strikes became routine, extending the battlefield to Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and beyond. Guantanamo Bay filled with detainees held indefinitely without trial. Enhanced interrogation techniques, torture by any other name, became official policy. The two wars that followed 9/11 fundamentally changed America's relationship with the world, normalizing permanent warfare and surveillance as the price of security in the modern age. The wars abroad were visible. Soldiers deploying, bombs falling, casualties reported, a 24-hour news cycle. But 9/11's most profound transformation happened invisibly, in the digital shadows where governments learned to watch their own citizens with unprecedented precision. In 2001, most Americans still used flip phones for calls and primitive text messages. Internet access required dialing up through landlines. Email was basic, social media didn't exist, and going online was something you did at a desktop computer. Your digital footprint was minimal, often anonymous, and easily erased. 24 years later, you carry a surveillance device everywhere you go, willingly. Your smartphone tracks your location 24/7, records your conversations, photographs your face, and it monitors your heartbeat. It knows where you sleep, work, shop, and worship. Every app collects data about your preferences, relationships, and habits, building a detailed psychological profile more complete than what the KGB ever dreamed of compiling. This transformation didn't happen by accident. After 9/11, Congress systematically dismantled legal protections against suspicionless surveillance. It was lawful for the government to collect American sensitive information based merely on claims that it was relevant to investigations. The scope became clearer in 2013 when Edward Snowden revealed the NSA's secret programs. PRISM allowed direct access to data on servers of Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Skype, YouTube, and Apple through secret agreements. Other programs, like X-Keyscore, Tempora, and Muscular, expanded surveillance globally, including orders to Verizon to hand over daily telephone records and metadata on all customers. But the government didn't act alone. Tech companies became willing partners, integrating surveillance capabilities into products marketed as convenience. Your GPS navigation, social media check-ins, and targeted advertisements all feed a surveillance ecosystem that knows you better than you know yourself. The massification of internet-connected smartphones, social networks, and geolocation apps led to everyone carrying high-end cameras and tracking devices. As a result, the "if you have nothing to hide" mentality took root, convincing Americans that privacy was somehow suspicious. But privacy isn't about hiding wrongdoing, it's about human dignity, free association, and the right to think unpopular thoughts without the government monitoring. Perhaps more shocking than government spying was how quickly Americans accepted it. Pre-9/11, security cameras were mainly in banks and jewelry stores. Today, they're everywhere. Schools monitor students, stores track shoppers, and streets are blanketed with facial recognition systems. Cities like New Orleans rely on face recognition-enabled surveillance cameras that scan every passing face and send real-time alerts to officers' phones. The generational divide is stark. Older Americans who grew up with constitutional privacy protections often feel violated by constant monitoring. But younger generations raised in the post-9/11 surveillance state see privacy as an outdated concept. Why worry about government tracking when Instagram and TikTok already know everything? Ring doorbells quietly transformed ordinary neighborhoods into sprawling surveillance networks where every delivery, visitor, and passerby gets recorded. Nextdoor apps encourage residents to report suspicious behavior, often reinforcing racial profiling. The surveillance state ironically emerged from the bottom up as Americans leaned into free market economics and learned to watch each other. Other democracies made different choices. European nations implemented the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, giving citizens control over their personal data. Germany, shaped by experiences with Nazi and Stasi surveillance, maintained stronger privacy protections. Canada and Australia expanded security powers but included more judicial oversight. And at the extreme end, China's social credit system shows where surveillance leads to when unchecked. Citizens are scored based on their behavior, relationships, and loyalty to the state. Low scores mean restricted travel, blocked loans, and social isolation. It's a dystopian preview of what becomes possible when surveillance becomes total. America hasn't reached that point yet, but the infrastructure is already in place. The surveillance state was just the beginning. 9/11 shockwaves transformed how Americans saw each other, who was welcome in the country, and what threats actually mattered. For Muslim Americans, September 12th began a different kind of life. Hate crimes against Muslims increased by over 16,000% in 2001. Flying while Muslim became a recognized form of discrimination, with passengers pulled aside for additional screening based on names, appearance, or religion. The FBI's surveillance extended beyond individuals to entire communities. Between 2002 and 2008, the NYPD's demographics unit mapped and monitored Muslim neighborhoods, infiltrated mosques, and tracked college students without evidence of wrongdoing. Families began changing their names, avoiding Islamic clothing, or skipping mosque attendance to blend in. Sikh Americans wearing turbans and beards became victims of mistaken identity. The first post-9/11 hate crime murder victim was Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Sikh gas station owner in Arizona, killed 4 days after the attacks by a gunman who wanted retribution. Immigration policy shifted from welcoming to suspicious. Visa processing slowed dramatically, particularly for students and researchers from Muslim-majority countries. Universities reported declining international enrollment, while tech companies struggled to recruit global talent. The brain drain accelerated as brilliant minds chose Canada, Australia, or Europe over America's increasingly hostile immigration system. While America obsessed over foreign terrorists, domestic extremism metastasized. The same surveillance technologies designed to catch Islamic terrorists were eventually used by white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, and domestic radicals to organize and recruit. Children who never knew pre-9/11 America have grown up with active shooter drills, metal detectors in schools, and armed guards in the hallways. The security measures meant to protect them from foreign terrorism became daily reminders that danger lurks everywhere. America's post-9/11 response also gave authoritarian leaders a playbook for oppression. Vladimir Putin justified brutal tactics in Chechnya by invoking the war on terror. China's mass detention of Uyghurs in Xinjiang was framed as counterterrorism. India's restrictions in Kashmir drew explicit comparisons to American security measures. The torture at Abu Ghraib, indefinite detention at Guantanamo, and targeted killings by drone strikes eroded America's moral authority. European allies who initially supported the Afghanistan invasion grew skeptical of American leadership. While America spent trillions fighting in the Middle East, its global reputation eroded. Meanwhile, China quietly built economic influence across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Today's young adults have never known a world without the Transportation Security Administration, the Department of Homeland Security, or the Patriot Act. What older generations experienced as shocking changes, Gen Z accepts as normal. Taking off shoes at airports, having phones track your location, seeing surveillance cameras everywhere, this is simply how the world works. The temporary emergency measures became permanent fixtures. The Patriot Act was renewed repeatedly. Military equipment flowed into local police departments. Surveillance capabilities expanded with each technological advancement. Did we become safer? On that, the data is mixed. On one hand, no foreign terrorist organization has successfully carried out a major attack on American soil since 9/11. But domestic terrorism deaths now exceed international terrorism deaths in most years. Mass shootings have increased. Political violence has become normalized. The economic and psychological costs are clear. Over $8 trillion spent on post-9/11 wars, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, civil liberties eroded, and entire communities stigmatized. In the end, September 11th didn't create the world we live in today. Our responses did. 19 hijackers killed almost 3,000 people, but the choices made afterward by governments, institutions, and citizens reshaped civilization itself. It's not hard to see that every airport security line, every surveillance camera, every immigration restriction carries the DNA of that Tuesday morning. Think you know everything about that day? Think again. Watch 9/11 Secrets They Don't Want You to Know to uncover the hidden stories behind the headlines, or click on this video instead.